A serious sci-fi movie that tracks humanity from cavemen and women to outer space. You had me at cavemen and women and outer space. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I'm quite pleased to have with me today Colby Day. He is the screenwriter of In the Blink of an Eye, which you could watch right now on Hulu. It's in your pocket. But for the sake of all that's good in humanity, please do not watch it on your phone. I was lucky enough to see it at Sundance this year, and I saw it on the big screen with 1,200 people, and it was a cool experience. I really dug it, which is why I am quite psyched to have Colby in the podcast. And we really do a deep dive here because, as you will hear, this was on the blacklist, and then it kind of went through development hell for a few years before it was finally made into a movie. And actually, in Backstory Magazine, we have a section called Blacklist Tales where we take a script with the author's permission from the blacklist and do an interview about the screenplay, which is then unproduced, and publish the screenplay in its entirety. So the fun thing here is that if you want to, you could read the article and the interview and the original screenplay as of that time, which I believe was 2018, and see how it's changed to the final film, because it's sitting right there for your enjoyment in the magazine. But look, Colby was great at giving us insight into his creative process and what it took to make In the Blink of an Eye, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We recently published our Oscars issue, and there is a lot of great stuff to explore in there. In issue 58, we feature interviews with Oscar-nominated screenwriters, Oscar-nominated cinematographers, Oscar-nominated editors. We also have animation writing. We have foreign film nominees. And of course, we have our regular lineup of film and television interviews as well. So there is a lot to explore in this issue, and because it's our Oscar issue, we also have full-length screenplays from both the contenders and the nominees. So there is a lot to explore. If you've never read us before, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in Spotify and Apple Podcasts and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us chatting with each other. It would really mean a lot to me to have you head on over to backstory.net and support independent entertainment journalism by becoming a subscriber. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with screenwriter Colby Day about his latest film, In the Blink of an Eye, which you could watch right now on Hulu. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, well, so, okay, I want to give everybody a baseline for you, kind of going way back. Tell us who you are and from whence dost thou hail, and how writing became something that you became interested in.
I grew up wanting to be a writer. I think the first thing I interacted with were books, or like knew that people wrote were books. My family grew up at the movies, but I don't think I knew that people made movies. So I thought I wanted to be an author. And then I remember seeing as a young kid, the Discovery Channel had a like behind the scenes of special effects TV show. And I remember seeing that and being like, oh, people made these things that I love to go see. And so that was sort of at an early age. And then my dad worked at a car dealership, and they had a video camera because they needed to record what cars had damage for insurance purposes. And my younger brother and I like took the video camera and we're like, we're going to go make movies. So that was maybe at 10. And then from then I was obsessed. I think like seeing Evil Dead was probably the very first transformative, like, oh, you can go make a movie with your friends, and really kind of locked me in on like, I want to go do that. And then went to NYU for their dramatic writing program. And oddly, their writing program is very siloed from their film program. And so as much as I wanted to get to go make movies, you're really there to learn how to write them, not to make them. And so all the friends I had were theater kids. And so anytime I sort of pitched them, could we make a short film? Could we go make a film together? They would sort of say like, we don't know how to do that. But if you wrote a play, we could do a play. We could do a play together. And so I kind of got talked into writing a play. And it was a very crazy like adventure story. It's not what you would think of as being something for the stage, but my friends were game to do it and do it in a basement. And so I kind of got sucked into theater land after college, where those are the people I knew. So I was writing screenplays, but I didn't know what to do with them, or how to get them to anybody. And the things I knew how to make were theater in basements. So I sort of became a playwright for a long time before eventually LA, but New York Underground Theater for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about that. What would you say were some of the things that, like, as you started learning screenplay format in college and stuff like that, that you studied that was kind of eye-opening for you as you were getting your footing as a storyteller?
It's incredible to be in New York and the Tisch building and have out front of the building the sort of like table of bootlegged screenplays that you can buy. And so I would buy all those screenplays. You know, anything that was interesting or unusual was the stuff I always really gravitated towards and sort of was interested in how they did it. And so I remember buying like the Pulp Fiction screenplay, Fight Club, anything that was sort of like, oh, what a crazy idea. But I think being in school, outside of my extracurricular screenplay reading, so much of it was talking about, very basic Aristotle 3-act structure, hero's journey stuff. And I remember kind of the end of the program being a part where you have to go write a 3-act, very traditional like film. And everyone in my class, because it's NYU, was like, this sucks. We want to make art. We don't want to have like a hero who fights a bad guy. Like, we hate this. So it was a very interesting playground for people who are really getting drilled in like Aristotle's poetics, but then are very much sort of like, no, we're going to reinvent the form. It's a nice sort of like marriage of ambition with hang on, but like it would be good to know how to do this.
Where
actually.
Do you sit with that though? Because it's funny, the old adage is you have to learn the rules in order to break
them. Yeah.
And so it's like when people revolt against 3-act structure, I've seen people give interviews over the years and stuff like that saying that like I threw out 3-act structure, and it's like, yeah, you did, but not really.
Well, that's the thing.
If we were to graph out your movie,
yes,
like you think you did, and like you just scrambled the order, but you didn't really throw it out.
Totally.
So I'm just curious where you sit on that.
My philosophy is sort of like all of these are literary analysis tools, right? They're not necessarily the rules, but they are there as sort of a framework to analyze the text that you're working on and analyze it as a reader or a viewer. In the case of the movie that just came out, In the Blink of an Eye, that is something that I wrote without being that concerned with structure at first. And then once I had a first draft, I very much was sort of sitting down to look at, well, is there an inciting incident? Is there a second act? Is there sort of a midpoint to the film? I do think about structure, but I try to think of it more as like analyzing the text just to sort of make sure that the narrative is moving. You know, I think you should know the rules to break them. Absolutely. Yeah. I did not think that as a 19-year-old, but I do think that now.
Well, so here's the magic question, because theater was such an important part of your post-college experience. What was it that you learned about writing plays after kind of studying what screenplay format was?
I think what was so useful in getting to work in theater was having to explain yourself over and over. You know, writing screenplays where I just sort of saved them to my hard drive and didn't know what to do with them, that was sort of the end of the conversation. And I think getting to work in theater, you so immediately have to sit in front of an actor who says, but why do I do this? And I think that was like a fundamental shift for me in terms of how to work on a project and how to think about a story, was over and over having to sit with the actors and sort of talk about why the character does this. I just think that it's easy when you're making up your little story to kind of like move the Lego pieces around however you want. And I think having to sit with actors and directors and designers and explain what you mean and why you mean that was a really transformative sort of grad school effect of, this isn't just my little Lego world. It's something where human beings are going to try to fill in all the gaps and want to understand.
What would you say the average length of your plays were?
I'm very much a 90-minute guy. I did not grow up as a theater kid. Like, I grew up at the movies. And so I think there was something to me about like, let's get in, let's get out, let's tell a quick story. And I was very much interested in plays that sort of didn't feel like plays. If there was any way to make a play that wasn't people in a living room talking, that was always sort of what I was most interested in was, oh, could you do a creature feature on stage? Could you do, an adventure story? Could you do a cowboy? Like, I was very interested in how do we kind of push the boundaries of what what you are allowed to do on stage, which I do think translates, I think in the blink of an eye comes out of the same sauce a little bit of like, what can we do that sort of pushes the form in some way? I'm really interested in challenges to what you're allowed to do or what's conventionally done.
I'm cribbing some of my notes here because we had the good fortune of interviewing you for Backstory Magazine. Basically, you hit the blacklist in 2016.
Yeah.
The screenplay. And we have a section of Backstory called Blacklist Tales. And we interviewed you in 2018, I believe. The one thing that I know that happened next was that basically in 2014, you started writing what became In the Blink of an Eye with New York's Pipeline Theater Company.
I did. Yes.
And so that's crazy to me.
Shout out Pipeline.
It's crazy to think that you wanted to pull this off on stage because I could see some of it maybe working, to be honest. Actually, most of it working, because if you set different areas of the stage as being different time periods, you would be able to transition pretty quick with lighting, especially because the cast doesn't transfer over to the other periods for the most part. So tell us about how Blink of an Eye started.
There's sort of two different points of origin to the play. One is I was living in New York and I was maybe 19 and very depressed and went to the planetarium, like observatory in Central Park. And they have a visual map that goes up the stairs of like, here's the history of the universe. And it's sort of like the Big Bang and then the formation of Earth. And you go up and up and up. And then there's like humanity and it's like 2 inches long. And I panicked. I was like, oh no, what does it all mean? What are we doing here? So that sort of sent me into a weird existential headspace. And then I was reading a lot of E.O. Wilson, who's sort of like an anthropologist and historian, and he was talking about sort of the origins of humanity. And I don't know, I think there was a lot going on for me of like, what does it mean that we're here for so short a time, both as people and then as like a species, that we just have seen so little of it. I wanted to write a story about time, which is really hard to dramatize, but I think is like the thing that we all reckon with, and knew I wanted to tell a story that had the past and the future. And I didn't really know what that meant. And so thank God for Pipeline Theater Company. I kind of proposed to them, I want to write a play and I think it has cavemen in it and maybe like space exploration. And they were like, yes, awesome, go write the play. And were really incredible supporters of mine and helped sort of me find what could be the 3 storylines within this thing. So it sort of helped me find like the Claire Gregg story in the present day, which was sort of like the least part of it when I initially pitched it, but is sort of the anchor thing, I think, actually. And, I wrote a version of it as a play that, yes, I think it could be a really cool theater piece if you could do it in maybe like a planetarium. But short of that, it never really made that much sense as a play. The things that I wanted to get to show and see and do just were outside the scope of the theatrically possible. And so when I did move to LA, it was one of those sort of like, oh, if only I could ever figure this project out, I would love to. And I moved here with a screenplay that got optioned when I first moved here. And so I was going to meetings with like nothing to talk about. And people would sort of ask like, what do you have? I'm like, nothing. So that summer, right after I moved here, I was like, I have to have a screenplay like now. Yeah. And sort of looked back at stuff I didn't have fully figured out. And this was the one that I really, really wanted to solve. And sort of as soon as it became a movie, it became very clear to me, like, this is where this belonged. And it's everything I wanted to do that I couldn't do in theater is now possible because you can do anything in film. And so it just sort of unlocked the possibilities just from like a technical standpoint.
Yeah. Did you ever finish a draft of the play?
I did a reading of the play with Pipeline. So there is a play that exists that sort of is the movie. I mean, they've diverged quite a bit, but the play exists. And the original title was The History of the Universe. And that was a 90-minute play. I was very much like, let's get in and out and we'll start at the beginning of time and we'll go to maybe the end of time. And that'll be the theater, our night at the theater.
It's always good to get work up on its feet. So it's like, that's what's so great because you as the author could hear it. What was something that you learned from doing your staged reading that informed you you later when you return to it as a screenplay, but also why didn't they put it on if you had it?
I think I maybe, if with enough time, could have convinced Pipeline to do it as a play. I love those guys, and the entire mission of the company was kind of pitch us something impossible, and we'd love to try to put that on stage. So it very much fit the mandate of the company. But, you know, the theater development process is like notoriously as long and complicated as the film process. It's just all for less money. So even in the play, I didn't have, and this sort of gets technically into how the screenplay works, I didn't want to hear from the Neanderthal family. Like, I didn't want to have them speak. I didn't think we wanted to hear their dialogue and understand it. And that was one of those things that when you think of it conceptually, you're like, yeah, I think that that will work, but I don't know how. And so I really do think getting to play with actors and see them emote everything that was written into the script for them without needing to talk to one another was such a confirmation of a theory that I really didn't know whether I should believe or not. And so I do think it really bolstered the ability in writing the screenplay and then in taking meetings with the screenplay for me to say, I am confident that that will work. We do not need to subtitle these scenes. We do not need to have them speak in English. We can see what they're feeling and we will understand what's going on. And having gotten to truly confirm that with actors, I don't know that I would have had the wherewithal to tell people, no, you're wrong as a 23-year-old, 24-year-old, however old I was.
I mean, that's really interesting because this is a long time thing with me. So I'm so glad that this happened with you. The Blacklist comes out each year and we go after the scripts that we like. One of the things that we always have trouble with is gatekeepers.
Totally.
And that's agents, managers, people like that always tell us, no, you can't publish the script. You could interview our client, but you cannot publish the script in your magazine because we think that'll hurt the chances of it being made. And we're always like, no, see, what we do in our magazine is we specifically try and publish unproduced screenplays with the author's permission as much as possible, accompanied with an interview, because it's our duty as part of our mission statement to get good works of writing out there to be experienced. So it's our hope that by publishing a script, the more people that read it, it continues to be a conversation and eventually gets made, because some of the stuff on Blacklist, your script included, are batshit crazy. And they're going to need somebody special to shepherd it, which you found.
You
which
really need an advocate.
What's so interesting, and I was able to go do this, is you did let us publish the script in 2018.
Hell yeah. I couldn't remember as you were winding up the story. I was like, no, did
absolutely.
I say yes or no?
And like, I went back after Sundance, like I'm skipping back and forth in time because we'll get to me seeing it at Sundance, but I went back and reread it, and it's funny. I was actually shocked because I forgot. We're still in our non-spoiler section, but basically your script, you could argue, is divided equally, as you said, in a kind of Neanderthal time, a modern time, and the distant future. And in the Neanderthal time, you start your script, like literally the first page, you give an explanatory note which says, although you're going to see dialogue for our cavemen, there is nothing spoken. Obviously, they had no sense of language that we know of, but the actors are going to convey this. Yeah. And you wrote out all this dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, they have scenes. Yeah.
Right. And it's in brackets.
Yeah. This is very much a playwriting thing, because one of the things I most appreciate, having worked with so many other playwrights, I did artist development for Pipeline as well. So I worked with a lot of playwrights. Because theater is not really beholden to the technicality of film, you can format a play however you want. And you can write however you want on the page to convey, here's how I think it should work. And this idea of here's the intent of what someone is saying, but they're not going to say it, is a pretty standard playwriting convention of like, we just need to know that the character thinks this, but we never need to hear it. And I see it every once in a while in film, but almost never. And I actually think it's such a valuable tool that I kind of ported from the theater writing world into the film writing world, because we do just want to know what the character's thinking. We don't always need to hear them say that.
It's interesting because having reread it after seeing the film, you could easily argue that you could take out a lot of what's there, but at the same time, filmically, what was figured out was how to convey the gist of what's happening and the
Totally.
gist of what they're thinking. You have like them argue occasionally and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like that stuff doesn't exactly translate, but it still does, strangely,
Yeah.
when they're arguing about something, because essentially, filmically, it actually works really well because of the visual storytelling of seeing what they're doing,
Totally.
seeing them make fire, seeing them try and heal somebody that's sick. That stuff all translates, and we don't need the dialogue. Like,
Totally.
it translates really fast, by the way, by not having dialogue.
The format is designed for people to read it as a screenplay, and so it's designed to be talky. It is hard to read action, and so I think writing it more theatrically with here are the lines just sort of allowed the script to be really readable and quickly read, whereas I think if those scenes had been just the action description, it would have been sort of like paragraphs of here's what they're doing and they're arguing, and we can then decide later, like so much of the translation from page to screen is sort of like crossing stuff out and being like, no, like we can do all of this in one shot as opposed to like 6 lines. I don't know that I knew at the time that that's what I was doing, but in hindsight, yes, it was sort of like designing it to be readable, knowing that later we'd have to solve that filmically.
Yeah, it's a funny trick because it makes it instantly readable and you could really blaze through those scenes, but you're totally right. It would have been very blocky, too many paragraphs, too much description. I think it's stupid that readers can't handle description, but whatever.
We live in a stupid world. It is really a stupid business.
I think description is fine, and you adhered to the commonality for screenwriting description that makes it digestible, which is to incorporate white space, to not make it too blocky,
Totally.
so that the eye could move across the page faster. How important is outlining to your process, both for a play and for a screenplay?
What's nice about theater is because it's so talky, I feel like I can just sort of start a play and I will get through probably 2/3 of a play and then have to kind of pause and sort of zoom out and ask myself, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why do I care about this? What is the story of this? And then kind of go back and create an outline because I get lost. But I think what's nice about getting lost is I find a lot of stuff that had I sat down and just sort of tried to structure the project in advance, I wouldn't have found necessarily. And there's a lot in the film and in the screenplay originally that is stuff that I found because I just was creating scenes with these characters. I just wanted to hang out with them. I think getting to hang out with Claire and Greg in their relationship and as time progressed and as they have kids and as those kids get older, all of that is stuff that I think if I had outlined first, I don't know that I would have found interesting in trying to create like a bulletproof outline that moves from scene to scene to scene to scene and like carries action all the way through. So my ideal version is getting to play around for a long time and then zoom back out and try to winnow that down or sort of like restructure it so that it's more functional as a story rather than just sort of like 100 scenes that don't quite gel. I have gotten, as I've moved into the film world and you are much more on the deadline of someone who is paying you to do something, the constraints of the business are write an outline first and then go write the movie. I've always been someone who's done an outline, but my ideal version of it is kind of doing it halfway through the process, which is not that efficient because it means I blow up a lot, but I do think it lets me play around for a while before I get married to what is the story and what is the structure of the story.
Well, so here's what's so interesting. We were talking about 3-act structure before, and outlining wise, what's so complicated about this is you're technically dealing with a 9-act structure. Because you have 3 different periods of time that each have their own beginning, middle, and end.
Yes.
So you're technically meshing them together.
Yes.
You didn't put it in a blender completely, in which you're starting at the end of one and the beginning of another. Like they're all moving forward in time linearly, but we're cutting back and forth over 45,000 years. Sorry.
If you more,
700 or something like that. Because in the future, I think we're 700 from now or something. So did you ever graph it like that? Of caveman story, beginning, middle, and end. Modern story, beginning, middle, and end. Space story, beginning, middle, and end.
You're totally right. Yes. So what I did first was sort of like, here's a bunch of interesting scenes that I'd love to see in this movie. And then that didn't have really any structure at all. It just was sort of like, I feel like going from the present back to the future and maybe this will happen. So sort of intuiting some interesting connective points. And then I sort of stepped back and was like, okay, I need to just sort of map out for myself beginning, middle, end of each of these storylines. So I sort of did an outline that's basically was like color coded of green, blue, red. One is the past, one is the present, one is the future, and did them kind of as blocks on their own.
When you color coded them, did you do that on a note card or on a screen with highlights?
I did all of the above. I like to work on my computer first, usually. I think having the physical thing, it slows me down in a way that's not that helpful. So I was in probably a Word document, just sort of like bulleting out, here's everything that happens in the past. And like, they do this, they do this, they do this. And usually I will kind of do that without trying to impose a structure. It's just like, here's everything I want. And then sort of narrowing down to like, can I shift things around? Can I cut stuff? Can I improve it structurally so that it feels cohesive and feels like narratively sound? So I did that for each storyline kind of on their own, and then tried to do like a woven document that sort of was like, okay, I'm going to try to do it in the order that it should happen in the script now. And so that sort of like became helpful to have the color coding at that point, because it was like, oh, okay, I'm green, red, blue, green, red, blue, green, red, blue. This is working. And then got a draft from there. And then once I had a draft that sort of followed with my new outline, I made a note cards of everything again, and then started to move those around on a table, because it felt a little bit easier to refine the structure that way, to just sort of move something and see like, oh, does that flow better? Does that flow differently? The film was very much structured like first half, midpoint, second half. And so the idea structurally to me was like, what happens in the middle of each of these stories that kind of like breaks it open and changes everything? And then from there, time is going to just speed up and we're going to go faster and faster and faster. That was my conceit structurally. So we get to a fundamental shift for the characters, like everything changes, and then we're going to stop going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and start going like, no, we're skipping like 6 years, 12 years, 20 years. That was the structural conceit for me, rather than like beginning, middle, end. It was sort of like, can I tell a story that like in the middle shifts how it deals with time?
Now that I hear it, that's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Just for folks that haven't yet seen the movie, you have a very distinctive opening. There's this thing in which people are always like, oh, if it doesn't grab me in the first, 15 pages, I won't keep reading. But you stay in caveman times. I'm looking at my notes, the first 5 pages, which was
crazy.
I know, which was a lot though. Not a lot is happening, but it's interesting what is happening.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if like, did it always start with the cavemen, or did you ever scramble things and slightly flash back? Was it always the cavemen?
I think it was always the caveman. I'm sure I moved it around in final draft and sort of was like, could I do this differently? But the initial conceit of the project was to start at the beginning of time, which the script kind of always did. Prior to the caveman, it starts like with the birth of the universe.
It starts with the Big Bang, which by the way is a full page of description, I believe.
Well, it's a lot happened.
Yes, a lot happened. And then you show life on Earth forming.
Yes. So there's a page before the caveman, but the idea was to start with them because it felt like the beginning of the story. I don't know. I just sort of had faith that was interesting. It was interesting to me, and I think it was interesting to hang out with those characters. And I like a script that just sort of drops you in and expects you to be as interested as the movie is.
Tell me this, how long did it take you to write? Like, how long did the stage play take you to write once you had your initial ideas? And then how long, once you decided to convert it to a screenplay, did it take?
The stage play took a really long time because I didn't know what it was. And I think the first thing I wrote for that was a big monologue for the Neanderthal, which is not no longer in the film. But I just like to play around and find stuff. So that I developed while doing a lot of other stuff kind of over the course of a year. I wasn't writing for a year. year, I was probably writing for 6 weeks of the year, but it took a long time to find what the story would be. And then when I sat down to sort of adapt myself from the kind of like non-functional stage play, that was really fast. I think I started that in July and finished a draft that month, basically, and then revised kind of over the summer. I hadn't really moved to LA. I was going back and forth from LA to New York, so I had a lot of stuff going on. So I would kind of, when I was back in LA for a week, work on it and then go live my life and then come back and work on it for another week. But it was like July to September. It was a couple months.
The other funny thing that's just coming back to me is your description of how they talked was in almost high chirps. And like it was enough of a description. I'm like, how is that going to work? Of course, like they didn't do that in the film to the film's credit, but that was very interesting that you got through your research that far. Well, going back a second, what was the script that got optioned that made you decide to move out to LA and transition?
Yeah. So when I first met my manager, I had a playwright friend of mine connected us. He knew I wanted to make films, and I had a really beautiful kind of avant-garde theater piece that was like a tour of a woman's life and sort of a one-person show, very non-conventional when you talk about like 3-act structure. And he sent that to my manager, and my manager was like, I have never read anything like this. This is so interesting. Do you have any film scripts? And I had a project that I had started while in college. It was I don't want to do 3-act structure, but I have to do it. And it's an assignment script. And so it was called Giant Killer Slugs. And it's about a small town that is attacked by giant killer slugs who have become monsters and mutants and are destroying the town on the sheriff's last day on the job. A very Little Shop Tremors kind of vibe.
For folks out there, you could read the script on your website. Like,
yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because it became a play.
Yes, it did. So I had written it as a feature. This is the origin of me becoming a playwright. I had written a feature film and my friends loved it and were like, this is so cool. We don't know how to make a movie. So could you do it on stage? Is that possible? And so I adapted it to do it on stage, sort of in a Little Shop of Horrors kind of way. So we did that. And then I kind of took using the play and put that back into a new version of the movie. And so the second thing my manager read was this like insane slugs comedy. And he was like, I don't understand what kind of writer you are. These are like polar opposite things, right, but they're both well constructed. So I'm interested in you. The slugs had music in it, and it was the year La La Land had come out. It was not a musical, but music was a part of the story. Sure. And so Lionsgate read a version of the script because my manager was like desperately trying to get me meetings. And they were like, great, we found our next La La Land. So they optioned the script. I moved here, I signed a lease, I optioned the script, I signed with my manager and my agent all at the same time, basically. It was a really crazy entry point to LA. And then developed that script at Lionsgate. And, you know, this has happened to me now over the decade of working here numerous times where you started and then everyone who is working on it with you is fired eventually and they leave. And so it just sort of became like this orphaned movie. It's just sort of sitting on a shelf. So if someone wants to call me about Giant Killer Slugs, I'd love to talk to them about it.
But so did the rights revert to you?
Yes, it was my script originally. So it's still mine, but the work that is for Lionsgate is theirs. So it's kind of this interesting like orphaned, okay, if I wanted to revitalize this, I would have to sort of sit down and really do a kind of page one start over, which I would love to do, but I would love to go direct it actually. So it has sort of been something that I have been just sort of sitting on a shelf and waiting for the right moment to go direct a horror creature feature musical.
Speaking of development hell, again,
yes.
Andrew Stanton said at Sundance that he knew that he wanted to get involved with this project one way or another to protect your screenplay because he felt it's a special screenplay and he wanted to protect it because it wasn't clear how this was going to get made.
Yeah.
So tell us this long journey of how it was going to get made. And then we will go into our spoiler section where we could talk about the rewrites and the stuff like that. Just generally, when did Stanton become involved? And was he always going to be a director, which he wound up becoming? Or did he start as a producer?
It took a really long time to find Andrew. I think I felt his sense of wanting to protect the movie from the first time we met. And that felt so radically different from how a lot of Hollywood meetings go that I was really surprised and delighted and felt in good hands. You know, the script was on the blacklist, which means it was popular before the blacklist. And then it became even more popular. And I had genuinely probably like 250 meetings about it because it was really crazy as a script. And all of those meetings were sort of people saying, I really love it. Good good luck. And I'd be like, oh, awesome.
Did anyone ever give you a crazy note? Like, if you would just change this to that, we could make it.
I got all those. I did have one meeting where I went in and the producer at this company was like, everybody really likes this script, but I didn't like it that much. And I was like, why am I here? She just told me, she was like, I think it was kind of a bummer. I was like, oh,
yeah,
interesting. I don't think my interpretation is that, but that's interesting that you feel really stressed out by this story about time. So it was very revealing about this person. I had a lot of meetings with directors who were sort of like, I really love it, and I would love it if there were just like more conflict between the characters, or I would love it if it was more about the environment. And so I would just sort of leave these meetings with like, you are welcome to make that movie, but that's a different movie. I don't know that that's the intent of this thing. I mean, years of those. And I would have, a new potential director that I'd go meet and they would be interested and then not available. I had a deal with another producer for a couple of years and we really tried to like find the right director and team and package. And it just never, like the pieces never puzzled together. And that was probably 2017 to 2019, something like that.
And during that time, they were paying you for an option, right?
One or two offers to just like option or buy the script from you. And in interrogating what those offers meant, I was sort of like, that sounds good. However, I need to sort of be assured that you're not going to hire another writer to replace me and rewrite the script. Nobody wanted to agree to that. And so I said no to a couple things, which in hindsight was kind of crazy. But my manager was sort of, I don't know, was like a real advocate for like, if you want to protect a project, you need to be very protective of the project. You can't kind of just take people at their word. You need to have it in writing, which is good advice. So I had a couple things that just didn't happen at all because of that. And then I had a producer sort of come on with like, okay, that sounds good, but if that's the case, we have to just sort of have a handshake agreement together to kind of like shop the script around and try to puzzle it together and try to do it all ourselves independently and then bring as close to a finished package together as possible to people so that like you are protected, which I really appreciated, but meant that I just was sort of, we all were doing this for free. Producer too. And that just never puzzled together. Like the stars didn't align. And so in 2020, Stanton was looking for a film to do. He's, I think, really was hungry to go do another live action movie and spoke to UTA and said, like, what are the best scripts you have? And they sent him a big pile of scripts. And I think in the blink of an eye was like the third one in the pile. And he was like, great, I'm done reading. I want to do this one.
At this point, you're still an unproduced writer.
Yeah. I mean,
like good on them, to be honest, that they were still considering that as something to send around.
Yeah. The initial deal I had just ended. And so it was sort of this moment of, can we revive this? Can we bring it back to life? Can it happen? I had initially been repped by WME prior to UTA. And so when UTA and I started working together, they were very passionate advocates for the movie. The fact that they sent it to Andrew was incredible. And then I got an email saying like, Andrew Stanton read it and he really wants to talk to you. And I sort of panicked. And then we got on Zoom and he was the first director I spoke with who asked a question about the script. And that sounds so simple, but it was the first person who asked me something about wanting to like understand the movie better. I had a lot of people come in with like, here's what I want to do. And so someone who was like, this is so interesting and beautiful to me. Why does this thing on this page happen? And I was like, oh, he wants to get it. Like he really wants to understand the movie. And that felt so different and so protective of the project and the script that I really felt in good hands with Andrew.
So he kind of came on board in 2020. Did he option it?
Andrew and I met and we were like, let's do it. And then Andrew, I think wisely knew the only way we're going to be allowed to make this movie is if we can kind of convincingly make the argument that it's not a $100 million movie. And it shouldn't be. It's an indie film that has big science stuff going on, but it's a small movie within a big scope. So he had worked with our producer, Jared Goldman, once before to sort of like help budget a film that another project he was trying to work on. And so spoke to Jared and sort of was like, would you budget the movie for us so that Colby and I can go to studios and sort of tell them like, we know you're going to read it and think it's a giant film, but like we could do it for a really low price point. And Jared read the script and was like, holy shit, wait a minute. Like, who's producing this? Because Jared is a very accomplished producer, not just a line producer for hire. He was doing Andrew a favor. And so we sort of became the trio that were sort of like, let's build this sort of package together of the three of us and the budget and start to sort of take that to places and say like, okay, it would be Andrew directing and it would be at this price point, which is not probably what you thought when you first read the script a couple of years ago. What do you guys think of that? I mean, it was just all of us in good faith trying to go get someone to allow us to do it together.
So here's the magic question. What was the price point that Jared came up with?
I think the original price point was like the movie could be under $30 million with wiggle room because it's just a sort of imaginary budget at that point. But I think Andrew and Jared were sort of like, we just kind of need to come in at a number that is realistic and also not intimidating. This is a mid-budget movie. It's not an enormous film. And I think you read something with space and VFX and multiple time periods and you sort of just assume huge. And I think we all were very conscious of like, what is the most contained version of the movie we could do?
And so what did the final budget end up being?
Hollywood math makes everything a little bit complicated, but it sits right around 30.
That's great.
Yeah, we didn't go up. Yeah, it sits right around
it all
there.
on the screen.
We got it all on the screen.
How long of a shoot was that?
So we had for the film 37 days.
That's great.
Yeah.
He got a lot done in 37 days.
You hear about Hollywood film of the 90s and you're like, oh, the Coen brothers had 50 days for Barton Fink.
Sure.
And you're like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Cool. No, different era.
I think we've expired any non-spoiler questions and we've got to get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Let's get into it.
But I think the most important takeaway is if you have something that's really unique, you have to be very careful on your option so that you don't get trapped in development hell.
Totally.
And it turns into something that it wasn't as it entered, because it could be harder for you to get it out. Even with your slug screenplay, sometimes studios do things in which they will hire a rewriter because once they have it, it's theirs. And they then charge the production the money that they pay the rewriter.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you want to get it out of a studio, the one thing is you have to get somebody to pay that studio for those bogus rewrites. Whether or not they keep them doesn't matter. It adds to the cost. So you again showed that like keeping In the Blink of an Eye as a quote unquote free project for a while allowed you to have the power to protect it. That's a great note. Well, so speaking of notes, here we go. We're going to get into the spoilers section.
Let's do it.
For podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see these Zoomcasts, you could see us talking. If you have not yet watched In the Blink of an Eye, it's in your pocket. It's on Hulu through your Disney Plus app, but don't watch it on your phone. Go to the biggest screen you can find to watch it. Press pause here, go watch it, come back, because we are now going to get into the spoilers. You've been warned. Speaking of notes, what was that note? What was the question that Andrew Stanton asked you about your screenplay that made you realize, ooh, he's really analyzed the script?
In the script as he read it, and this is not in the film, which I think speaks to his question, there was a moment as we sort of sped up through time and Claire and Greg have sort of moved on and we're with her house where the house is there and the tree in front of the house, like a branch breaks and falls into the house and like crushes the living room. And Andrew just immediately was like, why does this happen? And I was like, so much time has passed and the house is sort of vacant. And it's this idea that like the natural world is encroaching on the man-made world. And he was like, yes, that's beautiful. I'm not sure that filmically we will be able to pull that off. And I don't know that it will have the meaning that you intend, but I love it as an idea. Are there other ways we could do that? It just was this sort of director moment of, I want to get under the hood with you and understand why everything happens in the movie, especially the stuff that I don't understand. And it spoke to me of Andrew's sort of egolessness as far as like, I don't know the answer to this and I want you to tell me your answer for it, which is like an incredible collaborator to get to have.
Okay, this won the Alfred P. Sloan Award at Sundance. How did it end up being a Hulu release? Briefly, because I have so many questions about the story, because I easily could have seen it being a theatrical. It played really well with the crowd, and I'm really glad that somebody like Hulu was able to absorb it and bring it in and make it possible to be made, because again, it is a weird budget in the timeline that we're in.
Yes.
$30 million is considered a mid-budget when it used to be a higher budget in the 90s. Like those films are rare. So when did Hulu become involved?
We brought the film to a couple places. Searchlight was one of them. I think Film Nation was one of them. You know, a couple of the interesting independent films that have scope places. And Searchlight, by virtue of being Fox, which had become Disney, Disney was just sort of a place that I think had extra incentive to want to work with Andrew. And I think put us in a position where Andrew was sort of able to, have a little bit more freedom than I think had we gone somewhere else to do the movie, just by virtue of being trusted by the powers that run the company. And part of the deal at Searchlight when we first made the deal was we are putting our projects onto Hulu. And I think that was just sort of baked into the initial conceit of this will most likely be a Hulu release, where our deals were made in sort of peak streaming. We want to bolster our streaming service. And I don't know that if we brought them the movie today, that would be the decision they made today. But the sort of like release plan strategy is one of those things that once you commit to a path, it's pretty hard to disentangle.
Look, whatever it takes. I mean,
and that was our thought process too, is like, look, if they're going to make the movie and pay for the movie and people will see it, then let's go make the movie.
Yeah. Now that we're in our spoiler section, one of the things that is most interesting about the screenplay is you could argue that for all of its bucking tradition, it doesn't have an antagonist.
Yeah.
Time is basically everyone's antagonist. As we see the lives of these people, we see characters die, we see their kids take over and become, the next protagonist. What was that as a challenge?
I think that writing the film with this sort of idea as an antagonist was baked into the conceit for me of like, oh, could I do that? But yes, it became sort of a dramatic challenge of, well, what is a way to dramatize that within each story? And so I think it meant really focusing the past on like the life and death stakes of will I or won't I make it through this thing that's happening right now, so that you could kind of have adventure movie stakes as opposed to like antagonist stakes. And I think it meant finding sort of a similar like life and death problem for the future, even though it was sort of a longer term problem, the same kind of like, okay, something has gone wrong and I have to see if I can survive it. So I think it meant making the stakes of the movie sort of like survival. It's oddly a survival story sort of for all three storylines.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And there's a lot of fantastic reasons to read us, namely that we just published our Oscars issue, which is just an awesome jam-packed collection of articles and interviews. And it features, of course, Oscar-nominated screenwriters, but also directors, also Oscar-nominated editors, also Oscar-nominated cinematographers, and animation writers and directors. And of course, our usual lineup of current cinema and television articles. And we also published all the screenplays in their entirety of both the contenders and the actual Oscar nominees, and the WGA nominees as well. So there's a lot to explore in there, and if you've never read us before, I hope you check out our completely free issue that you could read to see who we are and test drive us. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription over at backstory.net. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could watch these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us chatting. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support independent entertainment journalism and become a subscriber. So thanks for considering. But now let's jump right back into our conversation with screenwriter Colby Day about his latest film, In the Blink of an Eye, which you could watch on Hulu right now. Here's one of the funny things when I was rereading the script. The cavemen, you literally say on the page, and then they go hunt woolly mammoths, and it's amazing. Like you have the word amazing and an exclamation point. Like you don't explain how they're doing it or whatever. And I was like rereading it and I'm like, okay, that's not in the movie. Tell us about like how you envision that and how it was easy to kind of go back and curb stuff like that. Also in the screenplay on the ship in the future, it's not one room that she's like altering. The whole ship becomes like a swamp. Even more so than in the movie, but you still kept the idea of that, but you just refined it more. So tell us about woolly mammoths and stuff like that.
I just wanted some scope. The whole conceit of the film is kind of people in caves or rooms having conversations, oddly, despite it being really sweeping. The woolly mammoth hunt was sort of something that kind of, as we get to the end of the storylines, we start to really zoom through time and like really zoom out. And so the intent was sort of like, can we just show something that's really kind of sweeping and big and suddenly sort of like brings us out of everything we've been in into something else. And this idea of like, oh, we're seeing these people sort of like have this big coordinated woolly mammoth hunt seemed very cool to me. Did seem amazing. I also wrote in at some point in the script a version in which David, Claire, and Greg's son lives in San Francisco, and we see like San Francisco burn down. That was another sort of like, I just want like some scale to this movie, if only in a couple moments of like, how do we get something big that feels like, oh, wow, we're in an epic, even if we're not for most of the film. Those are both things that also you sit with a director and you're like, this will cost how many millions of dollars to do, and how many days, and how many hundreds of people, and does it tell the story? And I think it didn't really tell a story. It just sort of was there to give you a feeling. And so you kind of then get to the creative problem solving of, are there any other ways to give us that feeling without needing to like burn down San Francisco?
Right. I don't think San Francisco is burning in the final film, because it's been emblazed in my mind as the screenplay all this time. But it is interesting. Just briefly, where was that in your mind? Because essentially, for our listeners, if you're listening to this part of the podcast, you should have seen the damn movie. But in case
we're getting very specific, guys.
In the future, there's a company called Elixir that comes up, which is Claire and Greg's son, David. He creates it. And one of the things that's part of Elixir is some gene splicing that gives human aging really serious longevity.
Yeah.
They say at one point in the script, it could be up to 500 years. At one point, we see in the script riots happening overseas because of that on the news. It's unclear what people would riot about. I mean, but whatever. What in your mind is going on Earth? Like, why is San Francisco burning? And the mission to the other planet, is it just the typical thing that we always think, in which we're going to run out of resources and we need to branch out off this little rock? Or did you have that more fleshed out? What was happening on Earth that was the problem?
When you start to talk with longevity people, the issue they all bring up is like, we already overuse resources. So if we had the richest people on Earth living longer, they are already sort of the culprits for like all of the misuse of the resources we have.
Say it isn't so. What?
Surprise. Wealth is an issue. And so when you start to talk to like futurists about this, they all sort of say this will fundamentally tear society apart. You will stratify into like the people who are allowed to do this and the people who are not allowed to do this. And it will sort of just like exacerbate everything that's already an issue, including like the climate impact of people on the planet. And so I think writing a story, even starting it in 2014, working on it in 2017, the idea of we've defeated the antagonist that is death, I wanted to see the consequences of that. Like it felt a little bit too hopeful or optimistic to me to assume that that could happen and not have very dire consequences. So in my mind, oddly, the ability to kind of like defeat death could or would potentially be something that kind of is the nail in the coffin for our current understanding of living on Earth. But this is all kind of like background noise, even in the screenplay, that as you start to kind of craft the edit of the film, asks really big questions sort of in the very final act in a way that I think became challenging to keep, to incorporate, to utilize.
I mean, we'll get there in a second. And one of the things that I wrote down was in the script, at least, Coakley says there's 13 of us with 200 genetic samples. They might be everywhere. We won't really know, because it seems like in this plan, the colonists really spread out so that they're not entirely aware of how the other colonies are going. I thought that was a really fascinating concept.
Yeah, I initially knew I wanted Coakley to be alone, but I also wanted her to have someone else to talk to. And so in the very initial conceit of the film, there was kind of this idea of like, oh, is the person she's speaking with on another mission? And then they're getting further and further apart. And so they eventually aren't going to be able to communicate anymore.
Which is an idea that I love, by the way. That's great.
Thank you. The science of space travel is such a downer to like story constraints when you start to get into like, that's not really possible. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, what's a different way to do this? And I think giving her an artificial companion sort of did the same thing of like, you're alone, but you're not alone. And what does it mean to feel like you have support, but are also still alone? Kind of delivered the same goal. But I was just sort of playing with, were I creating a mission to try to save humanity, I would not send one person to one place. I would send a lot of people to a lot of different places and hope 2 of them make it, 3 of them make it.
There is one antagonist that nobody could get away from, and that's good old death.
Exactly.
And you show it in the caveman story. You show it with Claire's story about her aging mom. The question is, what's going to happen in the future story? And in the 2018 draft, it's more about, oh, can we get the swamp so we have enough air to get there? And you don't really have what the film has, which is a fascinating baby sequence of taking these baby packets, I'm going to call them
Yes, our
baby packets.
artificial babies. Yeah.
Yes, artificial babies that are humans, though,
Uh-huh.
and cooking them, and a lot of them don't work.
Yeah.
And then there is the fifth one, which is obviously V, and that's the one that does work. She's then raising all these kids on the ship so that she's able to have a kid that helps her raise other kids. She's able to have some settlers when she lands. And that was an interesting sequence, but also dealing with death and her interpretation of it, because she's going to live a long time.
Yeah.
And not all these kids that she's giving birth to have the gene in them for longevity. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
She's going to outlive them
Yes.
in many cases, which is interesting. Tell us about adding that section, because that seems like something really new that you added.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had always sort of supposed that V would be the first one that made it. So that was sort of like taken for granted in my brain as the writer. But in sitting down with a director, and a director who was a father and is now a grandfather, me sort of explaining to him the process and like, well, the first few didn't make it and now the fifth one does. He was like, hang on, what? Like unravel that a little bit for me. Like, what do you presume is happening here? And in explaining this is how it would not work over and over, Andrew, I think wisely was like, that's incredibly important stuff to see and to experience. And it would be a shame to skip over this thing that's really important for a character. Part of constructing it in this way was the idea of Coakley getting to embody the consequence of this longevity stuff. If you're talking about like really traditional story structure, you have the synthesis at the end is like, we have fought against this antagonist the whole time, and now that we've defeated it, what do we think about that? Like, what are the costs of having defeated it? And I think Coakley was sort of this idea of like, can we embody in this character sort of the consequences of like having won?
Something that a lot of people don't talk about as much, and I wish they would more, that you didn't let it like weigh you down. You could have made it too much.
Yeah.
And so as you're going back and forth between three stories, transitions could be really important. They could also take away too much if they're too far out there, right? Like,
totally.
Like you're seeing too much. And so early on, you have the cavemen making love, like cavemen and women and making love. And then you cut to a failed tryst with Claire.
Yes.
And then Claire ends the tryst with a vibrator.
Yes.
And then you cut from that to the future with Coakley and a vibrator in your original script. And I thought that was interesting and like a funny way to really grab the reader, but it wasn't like you did that every single time you were cutting back and forth. And by the end, you knew that filmmaker would be so comfortable cutting back and forth that you have voiceover from one timeline while you're seeing caveman stuff happening in a different timeline. And you're not even putting in a slug line. You're not even saying cut to or anything. You're just integrating them on the same page because it's like in the last 10 or 15 pages. And you were clearly right that of like, hey, if folks aren't following what's going on in the story by now,
we're on page 90. Yeah.
So how important was transitions when you were writing and knowing not to do every single time and somebody's reaching for a glass and then somebody's reaching for a bow and arrow or something silly like that?
The idea of teaching the audience how to view the film, I think, is actually a really important part of like the first 10 minutes of a movie is just like, let me outline for you the rules of this universe. And so I think finding a way in the first couple transitions, like really seamlessly bring sound and texture and even the context of the scenes, like from one to the next was just a way to sort of smoothly bring the audience along into like, this is a movie that's going to do that. And now that you know that we're going to do that, I don't need to hold your hand every time we do it anymore. We can just do it. You will bring your own meaning to we were here and now we're here. But I think so much of the readability, especially as we get further into the script where it moves faster and faster, I also just didn't want in a screenplay to be like, and now we're in the exterior here and now we're in the interior here. It's not interesting. I know there's a lot of talk about screenwriting rules, but like anytime you can just write, we're here now, the reader knows what that means. You don't have to say interior, this ship, this day. It so quickly becomes kind of like antiseptic. And I wanted, especially as it becomes a more emotional story, to just sort of focus on the emotion of this person saying this, and we're seeing this here, and we're seeing this here.
I would say that you did do that, though. I think you still kept your slug lines going pretty clearly until where things were blurring a little more. Because you still do need to say, like, you're in this control room or this Victorian house. So there was a little bit of that. What was something that that was cut out during editing that was shot? Lessons as a storyteller during editing is, I think, something really important.
Yeah. I mean, the film had the screenplay that you read, and we shot as well. Rashida Claire, her sort of like the end of her life with her kids around her. And we also shot the end of her son David's life and sort of like how that mirrors her life. And it was one of those things that I think within the script and within the structure of the story made sense to have and felt important. And then you get to the edit and you're sort of like, do we need to say that? Do we need to show that that happens? Like,
well,
aren't
that you're talking about in both cases is that they die by injection. It's kind of like,
yes, that they both
are you ready? And they're like, yeah. And like both of them are surrounded by their family and they're injected with something, at the end of their life. So.
Yes, which felt to me like plot mechanic too, of like, let me sort of help to explain like, okay, if we've created this longevity thing, how does life and death work now? But also emotionally sort of like we're moving on from this chapter to this chapter to this chapter. And I think Andrew is sort of like an efficiency machine as we kind of get through the edit and you're kind of feel like you've kind of crescendoed the film and you're in a denouement. He, I think rightly was like, we know that that's happening. Like we don't need to show the audience that death comes for us all. I think we can infer that that's happening.
It's kind of interesting, though. There doesn't seem to be evidence in the script that David ever took his own elixir drug, or his husband, Sasha, for that matter. Like, yeah, they're both kind of hanging out.
Yeah, they're both hanging out. I mean, I would say that they probably do, but it's not. Yeah, I don't know that the script like tells us definitively either way. Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. Finding an ending is important. And I'm curious some of the other ways you wanted to end it. I just want people to know that in the original ending, which was really crazy, like you're going all the way into the future. The sun burns up Earth.
Yes.
The sun dies.
Yes.
We're in full entropy in the universe. We're in pitch black. And then there's this moment that flashes back from the camera's point of view in which you see Coakley. Coakley says, so what happened?
Yeah.
Like, and she's like, well, I turned you off and I turned you back on. And she's like, it was just a second for me. And she's like, what happened for you? And Roscoe's response is everything.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting ending point. I thought it was trippy.
It's very trippy. The idea was sort of, so much of the film is about our perspective of time. And so the idea of ending on this question of how much can happen in a certain amount of time, what even is time? And if you process it at a different speed, could you have lived through everything and then come back? Was really interesting. Really early on in the process of talking with producers and directors, everyone asked about that ending. And it sort of became clear to me that that was the thing that we would all talk about after the movie. And I don't know that did Roscoe come back to life is the dramatic question of the film, but it was a framing to ask bigger questions. And so I sort of, after having to answer that like 100 times, I realized sort of, oh, this is not how you want an audience to leave this movie, is sort of like on a mystery and like what happened to this character. I think you want to leave on the more coherent version of it, which is time kept going and things kept moving and the process continued and life went on rather than a sort of like twist. But I think having a twist on the page like really intrigued people and asked a lot of interesting questions, but it just sort of became this like, this is the only question anyone ever wants to ask me about this, and it's the wrong question.
It's a strange thing too, though, because although I love it, and I do, it is very distinctly laid out in the screenplay that Roscoe is shut off.
Right.
So that the mission can continue, and Roscoe does not come back on. Because we see the rest of the mission. So the idea of turning Roscoe back on after just being off for a second is almost even suggestive of like a multiverse situation, because in the story that we just saw, that does not happen.
Right.
So
yeah.
Was that the intent? Multiverse?
I started this before literally every story ever was about the multiverse. But yeah, the conceit was sort of like the whole movie, Coakley and Roscoe are kind of debating which of us is going to make it. Should it be me? Should it be you? And ending on a kind of, I was going to kill you to save me, but I didn't, was sort of the idea. And the idea being like, oh, is everything we've seen Roscoe like projecting what she thinks the future is? Or like, is all of this kind of like her envisioning of time and the universe and what would happen if she were turned off? Which is all super interesting stuff. And was fascinating to me and left me kind of with goosebumps finishing the script, but it didn't feel like the point. It just means you start to ask logic questions in a way that was like, we don't want people leaving with like, when did that happen? Why did that happen?
I think removing it saved you a lot of that, and I think it
Explainers about
yeah,
the
and it
ending
saves
of
you the
In the Blink
symmetry.
of an
And
Eye.
the
Yeah.
one thing that I've been saving till now is this is an old screenwriting trick, but you had a totem, you had an object that was
Hmm.
in each of the stories, and it's the acorn.
Yeah.
And the one new addition that I think came with Stanton is that you have Claire as an anthropologist dust it away and see it, and then Greg takes it for her and steals it for her, which was cool. And it becomes this necklace that's then passed down and is then part of the elixir mission as a golden acorn and goes all the way back to the cavemen and stuff like
Hmm.
that. When did that idea come about of having that in each of the three stories? And was there ever the temptation to make such object a bit more active rather than passive?
Hmm.
In which somebody needed to trade the acorn for something or use it for something. And by the way, it's totally fine the way it is. I could just see that in the plot matrix of
Yes.
how things occur, a possibility.
Yeah, I think from the original draft, the idea was sort of this object that she's studying is something that connects like her and the past. And that was always present. It didn't really become a thing that then like Greg got involved with. It didn't become about their relationship. It just was a connective tissue of she's studying this thing that belonged to these people in the past. And at first we think it's the guy we're meeting in the past. And then as the story unfolds, we realize, no, it's actually probably like his descendant who they're connected, but not the way we thought. The one note I got from my manager when I sent him the script was, I feel like there's connective tissue missing from this script. I see that the past and the present connect, but I do not see how the present and the future connect. And is there a way that they could? Which I think was a very smart note. And it sort of left me with like, there's oddly not symmetry to how these two stories connect. Both go sort of past to present and then present to future, but they don't all connect. And so the totem being something that goes from the present into the future storyline was kind of a like draft 2 idea of just like, can we build this thing that carries us all the way through the movie?
And then you integrated it into the caveman story as well. So
yeah, so it sort of became something that just like became more present because I think it sort of like helped us ground ourselves a little bit more. I always wanted it to just be a thing that was there. Yes, there's lots of stories about sort of like the desk that people own and traveled through time and how all the different people who had the desk, and those are stories I've read and I love those. I love things about time, but it didn't feel like we wanted it to trade hands or be a thing we were really tracking. Like the film's not about how does this object pass through time. It just was a way to kind of hopefully keep everything feeling cohesive and connected without being like, and what's going to happen to the thing? Which anytime we started to do that, I sort of felt like, I don't think that's what we care about actually.
It totally works.
Yeah.
There's only 2 other deleted items that I thought were kind of interesting. One was Coaxley and V talking when I think she's pregnant in the future.
In the future.
Yeah,
the future of the future.
Yeah, the future of the future. Like they're already on the planet colonized and just talking about motherhood. And I thought that was interesting. It's showing more of a character, but I will say that at that point in the script, you're not fully ready for the introduction of a new character scene because you are approaching that ending. So I could see taking that out works. But the one thing that I thought was really trippy that I would just love to hear about was Claire is this very active character. And when they become a parent, it's kind of handed off to her son, David. But at one point, David comes to visit Claire as an old woman, and he says that him and his sister just don't have time to see her as much.
Yeah.
And he gives her a seal robot.
Yeah.
Which I thought was totally trippy. It was almost like a fully life-size seal that's also a Tamagotchi, because it seemed like he said this could be your little friend. Like it's not an actual seal. Where did that idea come from? I think it's cool. And I totally understand why it went away, because even if you filmed it with a real seal rather than an animatronic, it still is going to slow things down. But I like where you're coming from, amigo.
Well, thank you. Those exist. There are these little robots that are sort of like, how do we deal with elder care? Because we're in this position in society where like boomers and older are sort of like vastly outnumber everybody else. There is this like big technological crunch for like, how do we take care of all these people when like socially we don't actually have the resources to do that? And I saw at some point this invention that was sort of like, well, what if we could build little pets, but like robotic pets for these people just as like companionship? And I saw footage of old people with this sort of like fuzzy stuffed animal that like responds to you. And I was like, oh, this is both like kind of lovely and really, really kind of like dystopian and frightening. And that sort of in between was really interesting to me of like, I guess this is good to do for someone, but also makes me very sad. And so that's where the idea came from. And I like this idea of like everything is moving past Claire as a character character and we just sort of moved on to a different world. And in the script, it's also like very jarring kind of every time you skip further and further. And so I think like finding a way to feel as disoriented for her as the reader in that moment of like, oh my God, like 30 years have gone by, felt interesting. But yes, structurally, once you start to kind of like move the story along and move the movie along faster and faster, it felt very hard to kind of like stop again and go into long scene and have that scene be about we as your kids don't have time to visit you. Like it again kind of like derails the crescendo of the film once you start to like get in the edit and try to create something that feels like it's propulsive and moving and not stopping down to be like, oh, this is a crazy thing that really does exist.
Your biggest accomplishment here is that you're at 45,700 years or so, and you did it in 94 pages.
Yes.
And that's crazy. So I'm curious, like, what was your longest version? Because the version that we ran in Backstory was 94 pages.
Yeah.
The inclination would be to make a really long script because you're dealing with so many characters, so many timelines. What was your longest version?
When it became an Andrew film and when it became a Searchlight film, Searchlight was sort of like, we kind of think there could be more. Like, we're kind of curious, like, what else is happening in this story? And so the longest version of the script was, I think, 118 pages, 117 pages, sort of expanding based on the question from them of like, could you expand this? And every time that was asked of me, I sort of was like, yes, we could do that. However, my instinct is we will find that stuff kind of boring and we will cut a lot of it out. So the script we shot was sort of in between the 94 and that kind of longest version. I want to say like 111. But some of that is like converting to production draft, which just like makes things longer because you actually have to format it. And I didn't totally format everything correctly in the like reading draft. But every time we expanded, I kind of was like, I think we're now sort of diluting the interesting thing about this, which is like we just are getting glimpses. And so I think once you kind of hang out with the characters more, you start to feel a little bit antsy, I think, in this kind of story that's not about...
Want to tell us anything that jumps into mind from the expanded version that people would be interested to hear?
There's stuff in the future storyline in which we sort of catch up with like they've built the colony and like what's going on there and how is it now that the kids have grown up, which is interesting stuff. And were it a miniseries or something, yeah, you would totally want to see all that stuff. Right. But for a movie, it starts to sort of drag and become like, I don't think that this is what the story is about. I think it's about kind of getting to hang out in these little in-betweens and then kind of like getting out. But, you know, just getting to spend more time with the characters, which I think was informative for everyone, but never felt particularly propulsive or necessary.
Yeah. What was your toughest scene? What was the scene that you kept coming back to as a writer over and over again? And how did you creatively rise to the challenge?
I think that some of the kind of softening that happens in the Claire-Greg relationship, the sort of turn that happens there from Claire being sort of opposed to getting much more connected and sort of her going from, I actually need to just take care of myself and my family and like go do my own thing, leave me alone, Greg. The turn in there, I think, was the thing that felt most challenging. I'm not poking at a specific scene because it sort of takes place, it's like a sequence of a few different softening points within the script of like they talk on Zoom and she has to fly away and then we sort of see Greg with her. In the script, there was more of that stuff and it felt really hard to kind of pivot the character from status quo to like new Claire, just because it was like deeply emotional and talky. Right? Like having a conversation about like what is our future together is very talky and didn't feel that like, emotionally important, but not that interesting every time I was writing it. It sort of was like, yeah, this is a couple having a serious conversation. So I think like finding a way to do that without feeling like we had to pause and stop down and like be in something too long was really challenging.
Just for the kids at home, you wrote this so long ago, Zoom did not exist in your original screenplay.
In the original script, they're on Skype. Yes, which has a very distinctive sound. If you ever used Skype, it has a very specific sound that I love so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, what's next? The Slug Project, I hope it goes. You know, I know that there's a script called Simultaneous that is set up with Eric Heiserer, you know, who did Arrival as a screenwriter, and he came on as a producer for that.
So the Heiser are simultaneous. We did a version of that for Hulu as maybe a series that sort of fizzled out, but Eric has, since we started that, turned that into like an entire novel, which is actually, you could buy the novel and it's really interesting. And he's now doing that as more like in the feature space. So I think it'll be a very different conception of what we were working on together, but it's so cool. And I think like everyone should go read the novel. He's a fascinating storyteller, obviously. You don't need to hear that from me. Children of Time I adapted for Lionsgate and was again one of those like, everyone at Lionsgate is gone now. So I don't really know what will happen with the Adrian Tchaikovsky adaptations. Very deep, hard sci-fi that's really cool. And so I would love for it to become something someday. And maybe that should be a TV show. I think it's really heavy, hard sci-fi in a cool way. And then I have a film that I wrote that would be for me to go direct called The Comedy Hour. So we're kind of puzzling that together right now. And I started my first jobs in entertainment were like late night TV. I was an intern at Jon Stewart's Daily Show, like 1.0 version. And then I worked on the very first season of Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. I ran the script pages up and down 30 Rock stairs. So it's a film sort of set in that world, but like 5 minutes in the future from now. So it's about a host kind of doing his show as the world around him unravels and makes him question like, why am I making a topical comedy show every night?
Right.
And I wrote it a little bit before that felt quite as timely as it does now.
Yeah.
So now it feels super urgent that we make the movie. So that's next, and just sort of in prep and figuring out the plan to go shoot and stuff like that. So Colby directing.
That's great. Well, Colby, look, it's been great catching up with you.
You too.
I loved your film. I hope people go experience it on Hulu, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. Really a pleasure.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriter Colby Day for coming down and being so generous with his time to chat about his latest film, In the Blink of an Eye, which you could watch on Hulu right now. And while you're surfing around, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We just published our Oscars issue. There is a ton of stuff to explore in there. We have interviews with Oscar-nominated cinematographers, editors, screenwriters, of course, directors, animation directors. You could also read full screenplays of the contenders and, of course, the actual Oscar nominees as well, and even the WGA nominees, because there is a difference between those two. So there's plenty to explore. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue at backstory.net or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us chatting right here on YouTube. It would really mean a lot to me to have you show your support for independent entertainment journalism by becoming a subscriber. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2026. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to find me on social media, you could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Blue Sky. You could also find me on Twitter, also known as X, as Yo Goldsmith, and also on Twitter and X as Backstory_mag. You could also find me on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith, and also Backstory_mag on Instagram. And if you want to go old school, you could also drop a line to backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I will do my darndest to get back to you. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the host of the Q&A and the publisher of Backstory Magazine, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.